Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining our webinar today with the subject, Accelerating the Battery Sector with Artificial Intelligence and Advanced Data Analytics. This is Voltaic's monthly webinar series, and today we are very excited to feature one of our partner software companies that operates in the same ecosystem and that we collaborate with on some customer accounts, that being Citrine Informatics, a materials informatics company. So my name is Eli Leland. I'm CTO and co-founder of Voltaic, and I would like to welcome you to our April webinar. Joining us today from, Joining us today from Citrine Informatics is Dr. Jacob Moen, Senior Data Solutions Engineer at Citrine, as well as my colleague, Kevin Wood, Dr. Kevin Wood, a Senior Solutions Engineer here at Voltaic. After the webinar, we will be opening up the event to an interactive Q&A, so please do submit your questions throughout the course of the webinar. You can do that through the webinar app. And a few housekeeping notes. So the audience will be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions, please do use the questions module. And if you have any technical difficulties, please reach us via the chat module and we'll work to help you resolve them as quickly as possible. So to begin our program today, we will start with a brief introductory overview of both Voltaic and Citrine Informatics for those folks joining us that are not familiar with our companies and what we do. And we will start with an introduction to Voltaic, again, which we'll walk through with my colleague, Kevin Wood.
Thanks, Eli. So hello, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. I'll just quickly go over the Voltaic platform, just give you an idea of what the Voltaic platform is. So the Voltaic platform has really pioneered this concept of enterprise battery intelligence. And to kind of give you a feel for what enterprise battery intelligence really means, that word enterprise really kind of hints at we're using data to help make your business grow. So this can be large scale or small scale businesses, R&D, manufacturing, in-field, kind of anywhere along that ecosystem, right? We can work with gigabytes to terabytes of data. We focus on batteries, so we work on electrochemistry and data that affects electrochemistry for batteries. And then we really try and take all of that and collate it so that we can get informed insight from the data, an insight that's going to accelerate your development and maximize your profitability. So we've been used by some of the world's largest automotive, consumer electronic, battery supply chain companies for the last 11 years and counting. Next slide. So to kind of give you a feel for how the status quo compares to what we call enterprise battery intelligence that Voltaic provides, this is kind of the industry standard analysis. So the industry standard analysis is you take, thousands of files that are kind of, all over the place within your organization, right? Those can come in the form of, Excel files or raw data files from cyclers or machine manufacturing equipment. A lot of times that data gets transferred to a flash drive or put on a cloud, and then it has to go into a spreadsheet where it's copied and pasted so that you can carefully compare data sets, from one test versus another test. And this really makes this process so it's kind of this stage gate waterfall approach where you're limited, right? Your reaction time here is very slow, and it's dependent on this whole process that you have to go through. So you're able to only analyze a limited amount of data, and you're not very quick in the way that you go about that. What Voltaic provides you through our enterprise battery intelligence is we want to move away from this type of reactive stage gate approach, right? And we want to move towards a more agile sort of development process, right? Where we can take data from anywhere that it is generated by your company, whether this be at the manufacturing line, the R&D test line, in-field use. What we do is we automatically will scrape that data, we'll pull it together, and we'll what we'll call harmonize it. So if your data is coming from one cycler versus another cycler, normally those formats look different, which can be really difficult to work with. We take all that and make it look uniform. We call this harmonization. And then what that does is it sits in our cloud, and we can do a lot of really powerful analysis with just a couple clicks of a button. So here in a little bit, I'll have the opportunity to maybe just show you a quick snapshot of what that looks like. But this really helps you be agile and make decisions very quickly in real time rather than kind of waiting for this normal status quo sort of process. Next slide. So, what does the Voltaic Enterprise Battery Intelligence Platform really look like? So we have our Voltaic Cloud, which is, like I said, it gathers data from anywhere along the life cycle of the battery. This can be research and development all the way to second life and anywhere in between, right? This data then sits on our platform. Then from there, we have these interactive web-based applications. This can be data visualization, advanced analytics, manufacturing Q&A, anomaly detection, any of these things. These are all interacted with through our web-based application. This can give you really fast insight to help you make advanced research development decisions, and also just improve, where your business goes and how quickly it can go there. Then kind of in the background and beside this platform, we also have a data science environment that allows us to be able to work with data science so that we can do more advanced analytics than even what is put into the platform natively. This allows us to be really agile so that this program can be customized for you. So our platform can be customized for you, and then these things can then be put back into our feature extraction that kind of runs in the background there. So then through APIs and integration pathways, we can connect and work with third-party data-driven analytic platforms. And one of our great partners here is Citrine, that we're excited to have this webinar with. And they really use materials informatics to help you make really great decisions about how to develop materials to improve battery performance. So with that, I will pass it over to Jake.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I'm happy to introduce Citrine Informatics. Citrine Informatics is a materials informatics platform. And what materials informatics really means is using data-driven methods and machine learning to improve R&D to achieve new materials with differentiated performance. We were founded about 10 years ago in California. We have a global team. We really did introduce materials informatics as a concept and also as a commercial software platform. We currently have quite a bit of recognition in the marketplace, both from our corporate and academic partners, as well as our publications and awards. Next slide. Citrine really is pioneering materials informatics across R&D in many industries. Some of our partners and our customers are shown on this page here to give you a sense of the breadth of the kinds of materials challenges that we've been tackling using an informatics approach. So ranging from kind of fine chemicals and electronics to kind of commodity thermoplastics, but most recently we're really seeing batteries as a main driver in the materials innovation industry. And I'll get into a little bit why that batteries is really pushing materials innovation and is really a great play for materials informatics a little bit later on. I also have Voltaic listed there as a best-in-class enterprise batteries intelligence platform, and I'll discuss a little bit later on how we have a data connection with that platform as well. Next slide. The Citrine platform really has about 5 pillars of technology that make it the best in class for materials informatics. First and foremost, we have material-specific AI. Artificial intelligence has certainly been gaining quite a bit of attention recently with ChatGPT and others, but having a specific AI stack that's tailored and tuned for the problems in materials science is something that Citrine has really thought hard about and put in several thousand man-hours into developing. We also have a smart data infrastructure, which is tailor-built to capture materials data in the context by which it was produced. This is really critical, and again, is one of the ways our platform is really enabling the kind of research that we see is necessary in this lithium-ion battery space. On top of the ability to roll in domain knowledge from experimenters and experts in the field, this is all rolled up into a user interface with an intelligent workflow. And this workflow helps us really leverage the things that machines are good at and the things that humans are good at in the same workflow in order to get those faster R&D results. Next slide. The workflow I just alluded to, we call sequential learning. Sequential learning is really driven by the recognition that materials data is by necessity small data. ChatGPT, to use an example, is trained on trillions and trillions of data points. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of data in the materials world. We're lucky if we have 100 experiments, maybe 200. That would be a very large data set for some of our customers. So off the bat, we recognize that we're going to have to do something a little bit different than kind of state-of-the-art machine learning in the tech industry. And what we do is we use domain knowledge and the ability to complete new experiments to confirm or deny predictions in tandem in an iterative loop to improve predictions in a way that we get to your R&D outcome in about half as many experiments. That is really the value driver of using an informatics approach, is to get to differentiated products that use maybe potentially unintuitive combinations of ingredients and processes in less time than you could using a traditional R&D approach. Kind of from left to right here, we ingest your historical data and we update an AI model that's based on that data with some of your knowledge using some key relationships. For instance, if you know that the ratio of carbon to binder is really critical, that's a nonlinear relationship, and we can featurize those ingredients using relationships you already know. We can also use domain knowledge to create a search area. You wouldn't have a cathode slurry that is 100% solvent because that's not a battery slurry, but machines don't know that, you do. So we want to make sure that we're optimizing within a target search space that experimenters understand and can add to the model to make it a little bit more smart. And then finally, we rank candidates based on performance targets, and often a set of complex constraints that are experimenter guided. What that means is that we're not kind of just throwing all the data in the model at a blind optimizer. We're optimizing sports towards specific targets which are valuable to this specific project. When we do this, we get predictions of new materials to go try in the laboratory. And by running those experiments, our model is essentially curating its own data set. Those are very high value experiments, both for the high probability of success, but also to add more information to the data set for the model to use. When you feed that data back into the model and go through this process a few times, we call that sequential learning, and that's when we really start to see that acceleration in R&D. Next slide.
Wonderful. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and share my, oops. Wonderful. So thank you to both of you for that introduction to our two companies. And now we will move into a conversational phase of the webinar. And apologies, I am trying to figure out how to show us on the screen. So I don't know, John, our moderator, or our assistant on this can help us figure out how to show us, so we're not just static. We're actually real live people, and we can show on the screen. But right now we'll just leave this slide up at the moment. So we're going to take the next few minutes to dive in a little bit as to the background of our two panelists and talk a little bit more about how each of our company's technologies can be leveraged in the battery space and sort of what led us toward this collaboration. So I'll start with Jake. Jake, I do understand you have a fairly extensive background in lithium-ion battery R&D. So can you tell us a little bit more about your background in the field and how you got into it?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I actually started in the batteries field right out of my PhD education in chemistry. I was actually hired by a paint and coatings company of all places to work on lithium-ion batteries development, which tied into some electrochemistry work I had done as a graduate student. The reason that a paint company, in this case PPG, was interested in working on lithium-ion batteries is that slot die coating processes are just that, they're coating processes, which coatings companies tend to have some expertise in. So the idea was, could we bring some coatings know-how and best practices to this industry? One of the main drivers for that was a big initiative to move away from highly toxic solvents. NMP is surprisingly non-toxic, but unfortunately is being regulated, especially in some geographies like Europe. So having an NMP-free slurry solution, which could disperse carbon, get to high solids, still produce excellent cathodes, was part of the goal of that project. We worked on that project and patented some key technologies. I'm happy to say commercialized last year. But unfortunately, we had to learn the hard way that this is a really difficult space to develop new materials in, even something as simple as a formulated binder product and slurry product. So that involves standing up a coin cell line, standing up a pouch cell line, moving to pilot trials to find out that the product wasn't sufficient, and kind of all the headaches there and getting to that customer validation stage.
Well, that's wonderful. So given that background, can you say a little bit more about what brought you over, what motivated you to move in a computational direction with your career and ultimately join Citrine, leaving the day-to-day of the lab bench behind?
Absolutely. In short, it's because I was lazy to do more experiments. That's a bit of a reductive answer, but what I was noticing in my time working on the bench doing these kind of experiments is that for a given customer request or optimization target, the number of experiments that you could do or would want to do to satisfy that are innumerable. So if you're thinking about doing a statistical design of experiments where you kind of systematically explore 4 or 5 variables, customer sends us their new highly customized active material. They'd like our binder solvent system to work with it. We need to optimize the carbon ratio, select a carbon, select some modifiers, try different slurry solids, right? All of these parameters can be optimized, and to design an experiment around that was something like 65, 128 experiments, and that was extremely laborious. And at the end of the day, we didn't have confidence that anything was actually truly optimized. We had just explored the variables. So that led me right down the path of thinking about, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this. So I went off and pursued machine learning as a topic, already having some programming background and data science background, to start understanding how R&D processes could be accelerated using data science and materials informatics. That led me to stumble across Citrine, who at the time was in fact hiring. And so I brought that skill set I had been developing from my own research to Citrine at that time.
Excellent. Yeah, it's interesting. There's we'll hear more about Voltaic over the course of the webinar, but there's a very large space that of application to apply analytics to R&D generally speaking, to help improve over traditional methods, as well as accelerate the battery field specifically. So it's interesting that there's a very interesting ecosystem that is developed in the time that our two companies have been in existence. So I think we'd love to hear a little bit more background on Citrine and how Citrine got started. So you gave a great overview during the introduction, but I think we'd be interested in hearing about how the company got started and what sort of problems or opportunities the founders recognized in starting Citrine and ultimately developing this field that's now called materials informatics.
Yeah, that's a great question. Our founders are just incredible guys who I think really had some vision. You think about this as 10 years ago, right? And machine learning and AI as a topic wasn't the kind of buzzwordy public-facing topic it is these days. So Greg Mulholland and Bryce Meredith, our CEO and Chief Science Officer, they met in the Stanford Business School. So they're pursuing their MBAs. Bryce had a PhD in computational materials science, and Greg had, I believe, a master's degree in mechanical engineering or materials science, one of those two, and had been working in the semiconductors industry. And both of them, coming from a technical background developing new materials and being kind of in business school together, realized there's a huge opportunity to advance this field past statistical design of experiments methodologies, which unfortunately is still state of the art at a lot of R&D firms, but really dates from the 1940s and 50s. So seeing that we're having these kind of data applications across a whole bunch of industries, particularly in tech, at Stanford being in the heart of Silicon Valley, I think what they really recognized was that if we're going to really tackle our sustainability challenges through materials, new materials for things like lithium-ion batteries, we're going to have to move a little faster. And if we're going to move a little faster in R&D, we're going to have to do something a little bit differently. And that's where they came up with the concept of materials informatics. We already had the words bioinformatics and cheminformatics, and for materials research, we needed a new word, and that was materials informatics. And the idea was to use kind of statistical data analysis, what we could now call data science, and machine learning in a closed loop together to predict new materials. And originally, the idea was to do this on public data sets. Interestingly enough, the compilation of public data sets didn't always yield great results because things that are in textbooks or papers are, first of all, not always the best material out there. And second of all, often not very relevant to current R&D thrusts, because current R&D thrusts are trying to achieve a new material. Often the most relevant data for those kind of more advanced projects is data that was just completed on that project. So it kind of pivoted towards a software as a service platform where people can, in a self-serve way, use these tools in a graphical user interface without much training, without having to learn Python, in order to achieve better R&D outcomes and high performance materials for sustainability in ways that were never possible before. So that's really kind of the founding concept of the company.
That's fascinating. So yeah, Voltaic and Citrine got started around the same time. We've been tracking Citrine, and it's awesome that we've started working together more closely lately. But I hadn't really heard that story articulated about the pivot from a sort of general compendium of material science knowledge from the literature to a more focused platform using and empowering customers to use their own data. So that's interesting, and it helps us understand how we got here today. So functionally, in terms of the R&D process around materials development, I'd love to hear more about how is materials informatics in practice different than the traditional forms of R&D. And I know in some conversations we've had, we've talked about design of experiments as a way, that's been it's a best practice method that's existed for several days. Decades, not days, for the purpose of helping to focus R&D efforts, and so like, where does Citrine and materials informatics fit into that workflow, and how does it augment, or is it different from design of experiments? Maybe you could go a little bit into traditional methods versus enhanced methods.
Whenever I try to explain this process to someone, I say, if you're a laboratory scientist, picture yourself coming into your office and deciding what you're going to work on. And it usually looks like opening up Excel and kind of doing some calculations and figuring out what would work. Maybe looking at your old results, maybe not. Maybe looking at some papers, maybe not. And one step past that would be, okay, now I'm going to open up a statistical package like SAS, Minitab, or JUMP, and the things I suspect are important, I'm going to make a structured design of experiments around, which is a fancy term for saying, I'd like to investigate these 5 variables in the minimum amount of experiments. If I picked a high low level of each one, what would be the most efficient way to explore all of those variables at once? That's what statistical design of experiments is, and it gives you equal statistical power for each one of those input variables on your outputs. So I think, from a perspective of, coming in and just having some sort of being struck by inspiration and using your intuition to create experiments, what if we used rigorous data analysis to design our next experiments? That is what the materials informatics vision is. It's a real differentiator, because even when you're using statistical methods like design of experiments, you have, first of all, very limited number of variables you can explore at once. Otherwise, it explodes into millions of experiments. And what's worse is that once you've done that design of experiments, you do not have an optimized material. You have a set of experiments which explore inputs. That is really not what most R&D goals are. They are like, hey, achieve this performance so we can sell a new product, or achieve this performance so I can, launch a product with my customer. Using materials informatics, we build a model on all previous results that are relevant, everything that we can find that we can curate into a data set that might be useful. Based on the signals in that data set, use machine learning to recommend to me the next set of experiments which are the highest probability of success. That is a much more sophisticated and data-driven approach, and it has, as you might expect, better outcomes. So it's a real kind of different approach in that sense.
Excellent. No, that helps us understand it a lot. When you talk about success, suggesting experiments that have the highest likelihood of success, what does success mean in that context?
It's a good
question. What's a successful experiment?
Yeah, it varies based on the type of experiments you're doing. I use that word likelihood of improvement or likelihood of success. That's actually a relative, somewhat well-known quantitative term in the field of Bayesian inference. It basically is the integrated probability past a baseline target. So if I wanted to hit, for example, a tensile strength of 300, what's the probability that this candidate will be past 300? If some combination of ingredients and processes produces a material that's predicted to have a tensile strength over 300, that would be a high likelihood of success experiment. And we can do that across many outputs and lots of inputs as well. So it's a very quantitative type of input and output.
Interesting. Yeah, again, it's a new perspective on it that I hadn't really thought about. So you're sort of designing a set of experiments with a specific performance targets and like kind of an optimization function in mind, as opposed to just trying to cover the largest possible variable space with the fewest possible experiments and hope that the most fruitful direction kind of jumps out of the data. It sounds like materials informatics is sort of doing something similar, but really in a directing your path towards specific targets that you're trying to optimize, which makes a lot of sense. Cool. So yeah, I'm going to throw it over to my colleague Kevin now to hear a little bit more about where he's coming from with all this. So Kevin, you joined Voltaic, just a few months ago. It's been awesome having you on the team, but you've been working in batteries pretty extensively for some years before that. So can you give us a little bit of your background in the battery space and what brought you to Voltaic?
Yeah, so I got my PhD in material science, and when I was getting my PhD in material science, I was working in fuel cells at the time, PEM fuel cells, and during my dissertation, my advisor asked me, he said, you work for Toyota and you're given $1 million. Do you continue working on the project that you just did your PhD on? And I thought about it for a second, and I said, no. And he said, would you continue to work on fuel cells? And I said, no. And so then that started getting me thinking of like, okay, if I'm not going to work on fuel cells, what am I going to do and where am I going to go? And the answer was that I landed in the battery space. I just felt like I saw that as being the next direction of where things were really headed, right? So I worked to find postdocs that moved me in that direction. So I worked at the University of Michigan in mechanical engineering for a while. Then I went to the National Renewable Energy Lab and worked in a surface science chemistry group there for a number of years, and then became a professor, mechanical engineering, that was focused on my research expertise was in lithium metal and solid electrolytes. And then went from there and became a CTO of a solid state battery startup company. And while I was there, there's kind of this whole journey that I've been on. Really was starting to reveal that we have a data challenge, right? Essentially what's happening is as we're going from small scale to large scale, there's a huge challenge in how we go about that. There's so many different variables. I mean, I could just think of maybe 100 or 200 off the top of my head that can affect how a battery actually performs and works and, what that actually looks like, right? And so it's like, man, there's a huge design space. And most of this time in my experience, right, we're only able to analyze a very small fraction of that data, right? My personal experience, it was like maybe we were, especially when I was working at that startup company, we were only maybe able to analyze about 10% of the data. And we had a lot of pretty sophisticated, what I would call artisan systems for doing that, and we were still fairly limited in what we were able to understand, right? And so if you really want to push the ball down the court here and you really want to try and make an impact in the battery industry, we have to more efficiently look at our data and get quicker time to insights, and be able to make more agile decisions as a company, right? I mean, that just has to happen. And so I think that's what brought me to Voltaic and why I've landed here, right? Is that Voltaic is working to enable other customers to really be able to make informed insights very, very quickly, be agile in their development, and make smart business decisions, right? It kind of affects the whole ecosystem of the company. And so I just think that's so powerful and valuable and, great thing to be part of. So my journey has kind of led me here, essentially.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm just curious, are there any kind of experiences that you can point to where in your work in the battery field where data got you to a win? I know we've talked about some of these over time. I wonder if there's any you could share.
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of the things that when I was at the University of Michigan, I really started kind of questioning like why certain voltage versus time traces were looking the way that they were looking. And I went around and asked a few people, and nobody could explain to me why the voltage response was the way that it was for these symmetric lithium versus lithium cells. And nobody could answer that. And so I was like, well, that seems like a problem, right? It seems like we should be able to understand this. And so I really started diving into the data, and that has led me, I mean, my entire career as a professor, and even as I, went into this startup company, was really focused around just what we learned from that, right? I mean, it was a very small little thing, but just understanding how voltage was changing with constant current was like, man, there's a huge amount of insight that we can gain from this, right? And that's just one tiny little piece of data, right? And when you talk about manufacturing, I mean, think about it's a massive fire hose of data, right? So just think about all the insight that you can gain there. And that's where, Citrine comes in here, is that there's just so much data. And we can make informed insights when we look at small chunks of data, but when you get to like some of these large scale things and you're really trying to make, informed decisions across the whole ecosystem that you need to be able to manufacture batteries well, you got to get some help, right? And that's where AI comes in, and really tailored AI, what Citrine is providing, and that becomes really, really critical, to try and make those sorts of things happen.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I'll just pause briefly to say that we've seen a couple of questions have started coming in from the audience, which is wonderful, and we'd love to see more. We will be addressing audience questions a bit later in the program, so please keep them coming. So back to our conversation. This question is for Jake. In working with customers in the battery field at Citrine, what types of problems have you seen them apply the materials informatics technology to, whether it's what part of the battery, what they're trying to optimize, where in the life cycle, what the process, kind of what's the wheelhouse, and what have you observed in working with Citrine's battery customers?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think from my point of view, there's kind of three big thrusts, and I would put one as I'd call slurry formulation, so cathode and anode slurry formulation. It's pretty often when we hear that someone says, hey, I've got this great new carbon black that provides extra conductivity, but it's hard to mix, and we need a special formulation for that. That would be a relatively typical application of our platform. Same thing goes for the anode. Electrolyte formulation and additive salt and solvent selection is another really strong area for our platform. It's kind of the class of formulations problems, but there's often a kind of unintuitive combinations of materials aspects there, as well as sometimes some molecule discovery involved as well, both of which are things that the Citrine platform can do. So what that really looks like is, hey, I've got this great new anode material, and I've got a lithium metal, for instance, anode, but it needs a really special electrolyte to work, and we don't know how to discover that because minutely varying each one of the carbonates and salts is going to take us forever. Is there a way we could discover the right mix of additives, salts, and solvents for our special anode material using machine learning? And then the last one is kind of, I'd say, holistic optimization, which is given some shelf technologies of this anode, this cathode, this electrolyte, this separator, these packaging options, and these process conditions, which one meets my customer requirements? If people are thinking about designing a custom cell for a particular customer requirement, and they're a custom cell builder, it often is somewhat difficult to select the right materials to synthesize into a battery cell, which would make that customer happy, and have the data to back it up. So those are kind of the three main areas that we see materials informatics being applied to batteries, but that is not to say there aren't other areas, just as kind of a grab bag, things like high pot compounds, anti-vibration sealants, formulations for fire passivation coatings, high dielectric coatings, are all things we've seen come through as well.
Awesome. And so, yeah, you've given us a great overview of like what the impact of Citrine's technology is at a customer, but I'm just interested to understand early in that customer journey, what does that initial engagement and onboarding look like from a customer's perspective when they start working with Citrine? Yeah,
so when we first start engaging with the customer, some of the first things we look at are project selection and moving their R&D program to using materials informatics. And the way we do that is kind of by iterative and value-driven approach, which is which projects in your pipeline right now would be most valuable to you if they were accelerated using materials informatics. That's a good starting place to kind of expand into, let's get your entire R&D program using tooling like this. The reason we want to start with the highest value portion of that is because we want people to see some sort of ROI or nonlinear return from doing this type of work. So then we go look at the data sets, decide what's possible, ingest those data sets, which is usually fairly straightforward, start building models and recommending candidates. And that can all happen in the course of weeks or months. Usually the rate limiting step is not the Citrine side. We have lots of experts on staff available to help, but it's usually customers finding their data and getting it onto our platform is the rate limiting step.
Interesting. Yeah, some similarities to our experience as well. So on that note, I'd like to go back to Kevin. You know, Citrine is the pioneer of materials informatics here at Voltaic. We call the space that we pioneered enterprise battery intelligence, or EBI, as you've talked about. So can you just get a little bit more specific for our audience about what types of things EBI contributes to battery development and materials development for batteries?
Yeah, so one of the things that just from my own experience, and I think is a lot of people can relate to, is as you start trying to scale, if you have a company, right, and you're trying to grow your company, which everybody is, right, especially in the battery space, as you start progressing, what really happens is you start getting data and it starts going everywhere. I mean, you just have, like I was talking about, the fire hose of data that just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so really what enterprise battery intelligence means is that we are able to help you take all of that fire hose of data, right, and really be able to digest it, process it, and then turn it into some sort of informed insight, right? I mean, really what you need is insight that's going to accelerate your development, right, at a research level and whatnot. And you need to be able to, maximize your profitability and make your company, continue to be successful. And Voltaic is a tool to help you succeed, right? It really helps you grab all of that data that would just totally overwhelm under normal, processes, status quo data analysis within the industry. It would totally overwhelm that, right? And EBI really helps you come in, organize that, and you, because you're spending, especially with R&D and companies that are greenfield, right? They haven't started making money from their products yet, and even companies that are, right? You're spending so much money on generating data. And really what EBI helps you do is it helps you maximize that data so that you get as much insight out of that data as you possibly can. And you're not just wasting money on gathering data that isn't going to actually help your company succeed. So that's really what I see EBI helping customers with, and it's exciting to be part of that.
Excellent. And again, audience questions continue to come in, which we very much appreciate. In response to some of them, we will be getting to a demonstration of our two software platforms and how they work together shortly. But before we jump over to that, I'd love to turn it back to Jake and get your take on, we're doing this webinar together because we are, we're actually working together serving customers. So can you give us some sense of how materials informatics and EBI actually work together in practice, and what your customers, our mutual customers, stand to gain through the synergistic combination of these two technologies?
Yeah, I think as Kevin's alluded to, it's really hard to know if a battery's good or not, especially if you don't have your data house in order. Mining Excel, looking at custom data formats, presenting PowerPoint slides, it's really difficult for anyone in any organization to be able to sift through results and say, was this good or bad? My experience using Voltaic has been that Voltaic is the place to centralize that information and get that kind of high level, you guys are calling it enterprise battery intelligence. I was going to say high level intelligence, but a look directly into the data and say, hey, this looks good, or wow, we don't understand these results, the spread is huge, or hey, this battery just didn't work out. Having insight to be able to make those kind of executive decisions for some sort of value-based metric, like we're ready to go to market or we need to do new things, is really huge, because one of those outcomes is I need to do more research. I need a way to now go look at these results, use these results to drive my research direction towards my requirements. If that's longer cycle life, or it's higher voltage, or better power capability, a lot of times when you're looking at your data, it's difficult to know what those stats are. But once you have that intelligence from Voltaic, it directly can be fed into the Citrine platform with zero effort, right? Having a dedicated data connection means that the results that you're looking at to make decisions are the same results that are driving the research direction as well. So from my point of view, it's a huge synergistic effect, which means that all the efforts that you've done on the data side, Voltaic's efforts on the data side to make this quick and painless to analyze battery data are directly usable for driving a research direction as well, saying, hey, we need to now go design a new material. So if that materials data is tied to that performance data, and it can be very easily, this is kind of a no-brainer for me.
Indeed, yes. We like to think at Voltaic about how our platform helps to just automate a substantial portion of what is typically considered data analysis. So to the extent that that type of analysis from our platform can feed into the Citrine platform and close that loop, that makes a lot of sense. And so we're going to get a little bit of more concrete illustration of each of our platforms in operation and a little bit more detail on how they work together. So we'll start with a demonstration of the Voltaic platform from Kevin, and then we'll follow that up with a demonstration from Jake and talking about how the platforms work together in more detail.
Yeah, so just to give you a quick overview of the Voltaic platform, we won't spend much time here, but just to kind of give you a feel for how this works, I'll show you quickly the Voltaic platform. If you're interested in more details on this, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to schedule a demo with you. But one of the things that the Voltaic platform, as we've alluded to, is really great at doing is handling large amounts of data and really kind of putting all this data into nice, neat packages. And one of the things we can do is we can do what we call metadata to performance analysis, where you can group things like what I'm showing here in terms of electrode modifications that have been done within this battery system. So within these electrode modifications, we can group things by similar modifications, get statistics, get insight into how this system is actually behaving, and give insight of like, oh, maybe this system is starting to have large deviations. Maybe this system is actually, a really reproducible system. Maybe this system is better, so on and so forth. So what I'm showing here, this is just a quick discharge versus capacity plot. There's a bunch of data underlying each one of these metadata fields here. So you can see that there is certain stuff that has been done to these anodes and cathode materials in order to be able to give the data that we're showing here. So several data points went into this. You can see that this is the average. The solid line you see here is the average. And then we have an envelope there that's showing like what the error in this data is. We can do things where we get down into nitty-gritty details like open circuit potential, internal resistance changes. I mean, there's just temperature fluctuations, all sorts of different things, right? It's all right here at your fingertips. You can make plots where you can really see how the distribution of these individual cells is looking. So here you're looking at discharge capacity on the first cycle and kind of comparing that. Here you can see that this certain analysis looks like it's better initially, right? This certain metadata group looks better, but by the time we get down to cycle 350, you can see that it's much reduced, right, as compared to this. So it allows you just really quickly with a couple graphs to be able to gain some insight into what's happening. You can really quickly and easily make these graphs. We also can get into more detailed insights. So this data that I'm showing you here is something called DQDV. Some of you may be familiar with this, but this really allows you to very quickly and easily track changes that may be happening in the chemistry during cycling. So here was that one sample that we saw that the capacity was starting to fade after 350 cycles. You can really easily see where these degradations are beginning to occur. Within the Voltaic platform, we're comparing apples to apples. This is very easy to do. And within a couple clicks, you can look at this and analyze this data, whereas normally this may take you quite a bit of time, right? We're talking hours, maybe days to do some sort of this analysis, depending on how your workflow is, right? Another thing that we can really handle very quickly is if people are doing hybrid pulse power characterization. This is a very complex, detailed analysis that gives you a lot of insight into the kinetic, thermodynamic, and transport phenomena that are happening inside of a battery. This sort of analysis can take days. I know because I've personally done a lot of this analysis. I have a lot of experience in the lab doing these sorts of things. This is a very complicated process that can take a lot of time. Here we can quickly, easily select a subset of this data. We can apply these mapping presets that kind of map out exactly what's happening here. For those of you that are familiar with HPPC, this makes a lot of sense here. We can put in these values. We can select exactly where in these cycles we want to look for this. And what we're going to get is we're going to get DCIR, or direct current and resistance measurements. And what we can see here is we can just plot real quickly a couple graphs, press generate. and boom, you're done, right? We've already analyzed this data. You've gotten these different graphs. You're looking at the DCIR values versus SOC, and then all of this value data can be spit out in tables here, really quick and easy, just with a couple clicks of a button. I did something while I was talking that would normally take days for engineers to do. So it just really speeds up your time to insight and allows your engineers to not just be dealing with data, but to be making informed decisions and doing really powerful stuff. So we can take all of this data that I've been showing you, and we can open up the pipes and send it over to Citrine, and they can do their really powerful AI, materials informatics analysis to then help you make even more agile, more quick decisions. So I'll pass it over to Jake to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks. Share my screen here as well. I think someone needs to make me the presenter.
I can do that. I'll do that right now. Actually, John, I wonder if you can do that. I'm not seeing.
I did it.
Great, perfect. Thank you. Thanks.
So as Kevin mentioned, it's fairly straightforward. You guys can all see that. Thumbs up. Okay. It's fairly straightforward to get the kind of results that he was just showing onto the Citrine platform as performance metrics. I'm just blown away by watching that HPPC demonstration. I have also spent the better part of weeks with Excel and Python and PowerPoint trying to make those plots, and to see them come out in a few minutes it's really something. So we want to use those results directly to inform a machine learning model, and we have a dedicated connection via API. So both Citrine and Voltaic have public APIs that can be used with a subscription to connect to these data sets. So the Voltaic platform can provide some performance information. We have a dedicated API connection in which we can use a Python environment that the customer owns to do some specific featureization or transformations, which is then directly ingested on the Citrine platform. The Citrine platform will then design new materials which can be both investigated and designed by users, completed in the laboratory, and then fed back into Voltaic. So I am completing this loop here. So it's a very powerful connection. We're definitely seeing some success with that out in the wild. To give you a little bit more of a concrete example of how the Citrine platform can design new materials, I'll share a little bit of an example here. So this is a live version of the Citrine platform, which is showing an example about designing a lithium-ion battery cathode slurry that doesn't use NMP or DMF, or even better, is based on water. To give you a sense of the kind of data that the Citrine platform handles, I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth repeating that Citrine stores data in what we call material histories. A material history is something that represents the exact steps and processes which were used to generate a material in the context they were generated in. In this particular case, I've made a slurry that has a PVDF, a carbon black, a solvent, a different PVDF, and an active material. Their masses are recorded. Critically, the properties of each individual material are recorded, which we'll use in our modeling approach, like what's its Hansen solubility parameters and its molecular structure. We can also record process parameters as well. So if I wanted to see that the slurry mixing step used a planetary mixing speed of 70 RPM for 3 hours, I can see that here. This was then carried forward to a slot die coating process. And once again, I can see all of the process parameters which were used, as well as any measurements that arose from that step. For instance, in this case, the adhesion or the mass areal density of the coating. And then finally, through cell assembly and formation and cycle testing, I can get to my measured properties of my cell here, which in this case can come directly from Voltaic. So capacitor retention at cycle 50, capacitor retention at cycle 10, number of cycles to reach 70% remaining capacity or 80% remaining capacity. These are the kind of performance metrics that we see are being really important, and things which can be directly imported from the Voltaic platform. We can then build a model directly from that data. Oh, is my internet hanging up here? There we go. Building a model directly from that data can be a really laborious step, especially if you think about using Python or similar methods. The Citrine platform makes this as easy as possible using kind of these colored blocks. So just using our training data here, we can think about adding a lot of features. So how much of each ingredient was used, or how much of each type of ingredient was used. If that was carbon black, it may not be that any single carbon black mattered, just the total amount of carbon black. We can add all these features to predict everything we might care about. capacity retention, gas formation, dry film thickness. Anything of those parameters that we saw in the material history can be predicted here. These models can get quite a bit more complicated. And again, this is something our users do all the time. We can start right away, start adding some chemical features as well. So what differentiates NMC 111 from NMC 811? Our platform will automatically generate 53 numbers that describe the difference between those two materials, for instance. Also, what differentiates PVDF from polyacrylic acid? In this particular case here, we can look at the monomer repeat subunit of our binders and say which numbers would differentiate those materials. We can also add custom properties as well. We can write formulas, which is how I calculate my mass areal density based on my coating speed and the density of my slurry. All of these custom features then can be used to predict the things that we really care about, like capacity retention and number of cycles to reach 80% capacity. Very critically, we can stack these models such that my capacity retention at cycle 10 is used as an input to predict my ultimate cycle failure metric, in this case, 80%. These models can be highly accurate. So in this particular case, my number of cycles to reach 80% capacity depends mostly on the early cycling data, as well as the adhesion and first cycle loss of these batteries as well. Probably one of the most important parts of our platform is being able to design new slurries. Slurries in this case, but really any material. I know exactly how much binder I can include. I'm willing to pick up to 2 binders at a time. Same story for carbon black, but carbon dispersants are optional, and I know that they're going to be a minority component of my slurry here. We can also exclude specific solvents. In this case, I'm excluding water-based binders, and I'm also excluding DMF and NMP and water, because those aren't relevant for this particular design experiment. I can also set specific process boundaries as well. The platform will then use those design criteria to optimize a new set of candidates which have the highest probability of meeting my success criteria. In this particular example, my success criteria were maximizing the number of cycles it takes to reach 80% capacity, as well as having a relatively flat discharge curve so that my 90% capacity retention is about half. I also want to have a very low slurry viscosity for my manufacturing purposes. We can see here the platform has produced 500 brand new recipes. These are machine learning recommended. They don't exist anywhere in the world or in my training data. And all of them have a relatively high probability of meeting these success criteria. We can examine one of these to say what exactly the predictions were. So we can see the uncertainty along with the prediction for each performance parameter, as well as the exact breakdown of what it would take to achieve this result. So if I went to the lab and used these materials with these set of process parameters, I have a high probability of achieving these results. Once this data has been captured, we can directly record the experiment result here, or it can be fed back into Voltaic for that closed loop with Citrine. It was a pretty quick tour of the Citrine platform. Again, if you have more questions or would like to see a little bit of a deeper example, I'm happy to take questions to follow up after this meeting.
Wonderful, and thanks to you both for that demo. So just want to emphasize, we are working together. We have, this sort of closed loop materials development acceleration actually in place at customers today. So we couldn't show any customer data for obvious reasons, but so what you've seen is representative, but it's representative of something that's actually real and happening through a collaboration between our two companies to serve mutual customers. So now with the time we have left, we'll jump over to audience questions. I'll take a couple right off the top that are some basic ones about the Voltaic product. So there's a question about the analytics that Kevin demonstrated, the HPPC analytic in particular. So yes, that is available in the platform today. Customers are using it, and it can be tailored to any variation of an HPPC protocol. If you have different steps of depth of discharge, different time periods for computing the resistances, any of those things can be customized. It's actually quite flexible in terms of being able to use the graphical user interface to map out the different parts of your protocol and then save those mappings and then run that analytic on any data that uses that same protocol. Another quick question, there was something about data formats for battery data that comes in to the Voltaic platform. So we work with all commercial brands of cyclers, including ones that used a closed binary format. We've been able to decode those sometimes with the collaboration of the cycler manufacturer themselves, and sometimes not. But nonetheless, we've worked with pretty much any format of battery data. We have our own format, open source, called the Voltaic data format, which we're happy to help customers get their data into. But if you have data from any kind of battery cycling equipment, including some custom home-built cycler, we can definitely get that data in without any trouble. So I will, so there's some interesting questions for Jake about the citrine. I think I'll combine a couple of them. So there was one asking, Jacob, are you stating that the differentiator is the sequential aspect? How is it different from the combination of DOE and ANOVA, design of experiments and analysis of variance, or is the design algorithm different? And I'll piggyback that with another question of what can you handle the situation when the dimensionality is very high, like over 20 different variables, and what is the typical dimensionality of those problems?
Great questions. The technical differentiator on the design aspect, yeah, we are not using the same kind of design algorithms that you find in traditional DOE package. So first of all, DOE is usually often fitting your results from the completed experiment set using some sort of polynomial regression model. We're using machine learning models, which are of a different class. They're not representable by closed form expressions, but they're often much more accurate for these kind of nonlinear and high dimensionality problems. Also, the design algorithm for a statistical design of experiments is essentially just kind of like a hypercube design. Our designer is using wildly different techniques to actually do global optimization on a model response surface. So it can actually step through the response surface and recommend candidates that have a high probability of success, as opposed to just structuring some variables around each other. So it's a wildly different approach. And the sequential learning aspect is kind of the cherry on top, because it lets us quickly patch up the data set to improve the model's response surface for these kinds of problems. Let's see what the second part of that problem was. High dimensionality.
Dimensionality, yeah.
Yeah, so we can do optimization against a fairly large number of material design parameters. So in that example, I had 3 optimization targets. I think we support up to, I don't want to misquote, my product team will kill me. I think at least about 24 optimization targets at a time. Sometimes, depending on the quality of the training data and the quality of the model, you can have very low probability of success materials because there's no way to satisfy all of your objectives at once. So the answer is it depends. Our software supports high dimensionality optimization targets, but it's really a question of, will you be successful given the data and model that's possible from your data?
Awesome. So yeah, and then I know you covered some of this in your example. This question I think came in before, but maybe you could review again what are some common parameters that in practice are used as part of the materials optimization?
Yeah, so chemical structure. So if you have a SMILE string of an electrolyte additive, that's a common one. Closed, like I'd call a line notation of a chemical formula. So, Ni 0.8, CO 0.1, Mn 0.1811. That is like a chemical inline formula. Some of the parameters we find that people are optimizing for are things like number of cycles to reach 80% remaining capacity. That's a pretty common one. Cycle at which voltage sag reaches some critical level. I don't know exactly what parameters means here, but typically we ask our customers to come with the most complete set of ingredients, properties of those ingredients, processing parameters, and measurements, either interim measurements or final measurements of the material. That leads to the best results, generally speaking.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that detailed response, and that takes us just up to the end of the hour. So again, I'd like to thank our panelists very much for participating today, and especially, of course, thank the audience for your attendance and for the excellent questions. And if you have any further questions about our software platforms, you can please reach out. I know both companies would be very happy to engage with the folks that have been on the webinar. So thanks again to everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.